Now that we've had the national election, the process of selecting the President and Vice President of the United States is turned over to the electors of the Electoral College. Let's now pull together what we have already discussed about the selection process and apply it to the Electoral College's role in making that final decision. So let's go back and let's start first. How many votes are there in the Electoral College and where do they come from?
Well, the votes of the Electoral College, there are 538 since 1964, and that represents 435 seats in the House, 100 seats in the Senate, and because of the 23rd Amendment, the District of Columbia is given 3 electoral votes, which is the same number as the smallest state. There are 7 states with 3 electoral votes each, and then there's the District of Columbia, and the state of California has the most.
All right, so we said Florida has?
Florida currently has 29 Electoral College votes because 27 congressional seats and 2 U.S. senators.
And we keep growing. All right, we also talked about how the vote on Election Day translates into electors. So talk about the electors process again. They're selected. What is their role in the process?
Okay, well, each state is given, a certain number of electors. Each political party within the state, especially the major parties, gets to select the people that they want to be their electors. And of course, it's usually the executive committee of each party in Florida that does that. And the people they choose are, of course, loyal party members. They are typically elected office holders or party activists or even people that have paid positions within the party. And they all have to take a pledge that if their candidate wins the state, they will cast their electoral vote for that candidate. There is such a thing as a faithless elector, which happens fairly rarely, but can happen because occasionally you have these electors who, when they actually go cast their vote in the Electoral College, they might cast it for someone else. So for instance, a Republican elector about 40 years ago, it's in the 70s, it was the last time that this happened, instead of casting a vote, I think, for Richard Nixon, I think it was, they actually cast a vote for a Libertarian candidate. So technically that can happen, but it usually does not. And Florida actually has a state law that says the electors have to make this pledge and that they're supposed to follow through on that pledge.
Right, and there are some states that do have party pledges and state statutes and some states that don't. And let me also be clear that the names of the electors are public. These are individuals representing the voters, and one can easily find the names of those people.
And so in the case of Florida, they go up to Tallahassee and vote on the second Wednesday in December is when they cast the vote for Florida.
Right,
All
and
right.
it is can I just add, it is a winner-take-all system in Florida as well.
Right, but there are some other states that do partials.
Right, there are only 2 states that do not do winner-take-all. One is the state of Maine, which almost always goes entirely Democratic, and one is the state of Nebraska, which almost always goes entirely Republican. But in 2008, there was one congressional district surrounding the University of Nebraska at Lincoln that voted for then U.S. Senator Obama. So actually, there was a purple state in 2008, and it was Nebraska.
Okay. All right, so let's go back to the Founding Fathers. Why did they create this thing called the Electoral College?
Well, I think it was a matter of not trusting the people to be fully educated about the issues and who was running, and also there was a very low literacy rate in the population as well. So in terms of individuals' competence, whether it was because they couldn't read or because they didn't have knowledge, that there were concerns about whether or not the people should elect the president.
And of course, the only role they have is just to select 2 positions, and only 2 positions, the president and the vice president.
Right, correct.
The other part of it is, why don't we just go by the popular vote? We've got amendments floating around different states trying to change it to where it would be by the popular vote.
Well, there are many people who say that the Electoral College exaggerates, either positively or negatively, depending on whose side you're on, exaggerates the popular vote. So that, for example, a very big example is 1992, when Bill Clinton received 51 or 52% of the vote, or actually he received 43% of the vote, and yet he received 69% of the electoral vote because the other candidates, Ross Perot didn't get any electoral votes, et cetera. So to get less than 50% of the popular vote nationally. Some people say that it exaggerates his mandate. People look at elections as mandates, as guidance as to what the president should do in his next administration. And they say that a president will often go in thinking that he has a mandate when indeed, like in 1992, most people who voted didn't vote for Bill Clinton.
And I think the reason that it really hasn't changed is because it's just very, very difficult to get a constitutional amendment through Congress and then through the state legislatures. And that's what it would take. We actually have to change the Constitution if we want to abolish the Electoral College and go to a direct popular vote. And quite frankly, most smaller states probably would not vote to do that, because if you look at this mathematically, the smaller states are actually at an advantage. They get more, they get a greater share or percentage of the presidential vote in the Electoral College than they would if they just had a popular vote. You know, some of these smaller states just wouldn't really have any influence whatsoever if it was just a direct popular vote.
Right, they're smaller than the size of a congressional district.
Exactly. And we talk, when I go into the high schools and talk to the high school students, you know, we throw out what's the minimum number of votes a state can have, and it takes them a while to figure out 2 United States senators and at least 1 congressional district for a minimum of 3. But then we start talking about, well, in today's world, if you were to go out and campaign and it was strictly on the popular vote, what states would you avoid? And then they start going through the North Dakota, South Dakota, and they
with
start
Dakota.
all that. So, and of course we
Rhode Island, Delaware.
exactly. And then we also talk about
Alaska.
the power of the media and the campaign advertising on that. So I think they begin to see, to be fair, the Founding Fathers probably had a very good idea on it. All right, so everybody knows about Florida's 2000 presidential election. That was probably the most current election. So just summarize what happened in Florida as it related to the Electoral College process. Dr. Jewett?
Sure. Well, basically, the 2 candidates, George W. Bush and Al Gore, were very, very close in Electoral College votes. And it came down to Florida as the last state who had not clearly declared a winner for the state. And neither candidate had enough Electoral College votes to win without Florida. And so we had the recount and the court cases and everything else. In the end, by about 537 votes, Florida officially voted for George W. Bush. And because it's a winner-take-all process, George W. Bush at the time, I guess, got 27 electoral votes, and that gave him more than 270 and made him become President of the United States.
And at the same time, because it was so close, and we were doing the recounts, and the court, the Florida Supreme Court was ruling, the United States Supreme Court and all, then Speaker of the House, Tom Feeney, was trying to intervene into the electoral process. So that was another element because you didn't know which side was going to go to Tallahassee to vote.
Well, it was when he was Speaker of the Florida House of Representatives, and he wanted to choose the electors because, as Aubrey was saying, it's the state legislature that empowers the parties to choose the electors, but it's really up to the state legislatures, and he wanted to take that power back to get this process finished. But because of the difference, Al Gore ended up with 266 electoral votes and George Bush with 271. So even a small little state like Arkansas would have changed the outcome, even giving George W. Bush the electoral votes in Florida.
And in my research on the Electoral College, one of the ironies coming out of that was then in the electoral process, the person who oversees the recording of the votes from all the states is
Al Gore. It was Al Gore as the president of the Senate.
That's it. So as the vice president sitting in the Senate, he's the one who had to oversee, which was one of the ironies of that outcome. But it wasn't the first time that we've had a crisis with the Electoral College. So let's bounce back and forth with some examples of some other years that happened.
Yeah, and well, I was just going to say that the main point that we really haven't brought up was that the biggest complaint about the Electoral College is that sometimes the winner of the popular vote nationwide does not become president. And of course, that's what happened in 2000.
Right.
George W. Bush did win Florida's popular vote. But nationwide, Al Gore, I can't remember, 500,000? Yeah,
Yeah.
he got about 500,000 more votes, but yet did not become president. And that was just the latest example, but we've had several previous ones.
Right, there were 3 previous ones, but they were all in the 19th century. So the unusualness of 2000, besides us all being Floridians, was that it hadn't happened in such a long time. It had happened in 1824, it happened in 1876, and it happened in 1888. If the Electoral College fails to get a majority, the election goes to Congress, where each state gets a vote in the House for president, each state gets a vote for the vice president in the Senate. So that happened in 1824 with the election of John Quincy Adams. Otherwise, it was a matter of 1876 and 1888, where the popular vote, the person winning the popular vote did not win the electoral vote.
Right. And in particular, I always like to tell my students about the 1876 election, because Florida, once again, was at the epicenter of that battle. 1876, the end of Reconstruction after the Civil War. You had Samuel Tilden versus Rutherford B. Hayes. And once again, neither had enough Electoral College votes to win. And there was only one state that had not officially declared a winner, and that was Florida. And it went on for weeks and weeks and months, and they did recounts and counts and tried to decide. And eventually, Florida declared for Rutherford B. Hayes. What some historians say was, though, that the Florida's vote was swayed, meaning they determined who was going to win based on a bargain that was struck, that Rutherford B. Hayes, a Republican, agreed that he would end Reconstruction of the South and take all the rest of those northern troops out of the South if Florida would give their votes to him. We don't know 100% that that's true, but there is speculation that that might have weighed in on it.
Right. Let's real quickly summarize the other examples real quick, and then we're going to get a final thought here.
Well, in 2000, of course, the difference was 537 in Florida, but that gave the electoral vote to George W. Bush, but the popular vote was won by Al Gore. That was never in question. Nationally, it was won. 1876 and 1888, the candidate winning the popular vote lost the electoral vote, and in 1824, since neither candidate won the electoral vote, the U.S. Congress decided who the president and vice president was going to be.
All right, so let's look forward, and since the Central Florida region is very much a Puerto Rican community, you always like to talk, Dr. Fine, about the fact, what happens if Puerto Rico became a state?
Well, if Puerto Rico became a state, that means that states like New York and some of the other states that have already lost representation may actually lose more representation in the next census. Between now and then, if it were to happen, then the size of the House of Representatives would actually grow like it did after Alaska and Hawaii became states, and then it's going to go back to 435. Congress can change that number, but there's a lot of concern about if Puerto Rico were to become a state, then that means 2 more Democratic senators because the people of Puerto Rico would likely elect Democrats, as Puerto Ricans who live on the mainland also tend to vote Democratic. So it's really become a very partisan issue outside of the issues relating to territories and taxes and other kinds of things.
Right. We could go on, and as educators, I know you love this topic, but again, I thank both of you for your insight into the Electoral College. So with everything been said about the Electoral College and how it selects the president, what would you say to people about why they should vote in 2016?
Because our vote really does matter. When we vote, we are instructing individuals who have been given the responsibility of reflecting our will. And as Aubrey was saying, they are pledged to it in Florida, and we really need to take our voting seriously. There's going to be a winner whether we vote or not, so we really should vote.
Absolutely. And as Florida has shown, and some other states have shown, in some elections in particular, every vote really does count. I mean, in 2000, it came down to a difference of 537 votes between the two candidates in Florida, and that determined who was going to become president of the United States, and really altered the course not only of U.S. history, but of world history. So it really, and you never know ahead of time how close the election's going to be. So it really, everyone should get out there and vote.
And of course, 2016 is an open presidential election, which makes it even more of importance for everybody to get out and vote. You know, as a UCF graduate, I'm proud to have both of you here talking about the election process, and I know what you do to educate students and teachers through the Lou Fry Institute. So Dr. Fine and Dr. Joy, I really appreciate you all being here with us. As we stated in the beginning, the 2016 presidential campaign is well underway. The process for selecting our new president and vice president is lengthy. We hope this program on how we elect our president has helped give you a better understanding of the process and the role of the Electoral College. Now it's your turn to start getting ready for the 3 countywide elections in 2016. They are the Florida Presidential Preference Primary on March the 15th, the primary election on August the 30th, and the general election or the presidential election on Tuesday, November the 8th. Are you registered? Need to update your address? Need to order your vote by mail ballot? Want to be a poll worker like Dr. Terry Fine is one? Now is the time to call the Orange County Elections Office at 407-836-VOTE, and that is 407-836-8683, or go online to ocfelections.com. I want to thank both Dr. Terry Fine and Dr. Aubrey Jewett from UCF, Go Knights, for all their insight and knowledge on the Electoral College and our presidential election process. If you are a teacher and would like to have a copy of this program, please contact the Elections Office or Dr. Fine at the Lou Fry Institute for Politics and Government at UCF. I'm Bill Cowles, your Orange County Supervisor of Elections, and thank you for joining us.